and I'll be bringing you updates on policy implementation. So, as policies are developed, they guide us in managing the IP resources. Now, why do we need to bring up this policy implementation experiences? Because during our day-to-day work in supporting the membership, we notice gaps that we feel like bringing them to the community would help us effectively support the community as well as members. So as you can see, the purpose is to provide feedback to the members and community regarding recently ratified policies and implementation timelines. We also give you an update on the current policies that have been implemented. And also, we bring you the experiences that we face as host masters while handling the request governed by these currently adopted policies. So I'll move on to demonstrate to you some of the currently ratified as well as implemented policies. At this moment, we don't have any policy that has been ratified but not yet implemented. All the ratified policies have been implemented. So I'll show you the list that we have for the recently ratified policies. The first one is the IPv6 policy and reference updates. This one mainly focused on the IPv6, the way it was, the initial IPv6 policy, allocation policy, the way it was initially drafted. Over the time, implementation of IPv6 on the ground, things have changed so much. And there have also been new documents or best practice documents that have come out that were missing or that were bringing a gap in the previous draft of the policy. Now, with the new policy that have been adopted, it seeks to cover those gaps. So you'll see that link. If you want to get more details, please follow that link and then you'll be able to find the specific changes that have been implemented. This policy was implemented on the 23rd of this month. So as we speak, the policy text that you find in it are now adopted. So any changes that have come through, that is how we host masters will be evaluating your request when you come for IPv6 resources. The next policy that I'll talk about is the IPv6 initial allocation update. Similarly, this also has a few changes that it has brought along regarding the changes to the initial policy that was there. So it looks at improving the way we can help you deploy your IPv6. It has in some way removed some of the restriction that we required you to justify your previous use when in need you haven't actually used according to, and you haven't used up to the threshold that was required. Now with this one, it will make it easy for us as well as easy for you to scale up your designs and then deploy to the best practices of V6. The same, this one has also been implemented as from the 23rd of this month. So the link that you see, you can find the specific policy text for that particular policy. The next policy that we have is the IPv6 PI update. This PI update mainly focuses on the provider or the end user assignments that we do. This also has made it easy for most of the end users, because in the past, it was a must that every member who requires to, or if you want to request for IPv6, you should have IPv4 or planning to get IPv4. But in this one, it's enabling us to say, if you don't have IPv4, we can still evaluate your request if you are using IPv6 probably from your upstream provider. So it's a whole different case as well. but it's an improvement to how we can as well increase the adoption and penetration of IPv6. The same, this one has also been implemented as from the 23rd of this month. So whatever policy text is in there, please note that it applies as from that day. The moment you come for IPv6 as an end site, the policy text will apply. The next policy that we'll look at is the LEM delegation in AFRINIC DNS. It has been implemented as well as from the 28th September, and this particular policy looks at ensuring that when you do your reverse delegation registration on our WHOIS, you already have responsible name servers that will respond to those particular reverse zones. If you do not, the policy states that we should delete those particular LEM DNS name servers. The same has been implemented partially. You see we have a LEM checker, LEM verification checker too, which is on this particular link. So what it's supposed to do is when you have created your zones, when you have configured your zones, you can test using this tool just to make sure that your name servers are properly responding. They should respond as authoritative for your particular zone, reverse zone. There are still one more thing that has to come out, which is the statistics page, which should be coming up anytime shortly. And then once we reach the right thresholds, the deletion of those particular LEM zones would begin. Right now, the Hostmaster team is providing support to members because we realized there was a huge volume of members who had LEM name servers. So we have an ongoing job that we are trying to have most of the members correct their DNS configurations and have a proper working reverse delegation. Now, moving on, I'll talk about the experiences now that we see based on most of the other policies that we have existing. There's an interesting scenario because in the past we had different policies that were looking at IPv4 allocation and IPv4 assignments to end users. Now, this particular policies have been in place for a while now since AFRINIC started operating. But over time, due to exhaustion, there has been an evolution whereby new policies have come to cater for the evolution, mostly the IPv4 exhaustion. Now with IPv4 exhaustion, what we had is a new policy called the soft rending policy. This particular policy never superseded completely the old policies. So when we drafted the consolidated policy manual, you realize that you get some conflicting information in different sections because the current policy, the soft rending policy, never overwrote the previous IP allocation and assignment policies. So if you can go to the section of the consolidated policy manual, you will notice that you get some conflicting information in maybe section 5.141, which talks about receiving additional allocation when you are about 80%. Similarly, in the additional IP assignment, it will talk about basic criteria must be /25% of immediate use and 50% utilization within this. But looking at the current soft rending, it is specifically says that LIR or end user must have used at least 90% of the previous. So this text, if a potential member or an existing member is going through the CPM, when they come to this section and that, and then they get to this, they realize that they are getting conflicting information. Now, for us as staff, we cannot make changes to this because these are specific policy texts. What we want to do now is to come forward to the community and request from the community for an appropriate way forward. How best can we handle this situation so that we remove the ambiguity? So it's a request to the community. Would the community recommend to us to remove the obsolete text so that we only have the applicable text that is regarding the soft landing? This is a question to the community. We would expect an answer at least that would help us move on and better serve the community. The next issue we usually face when supporting the community in terms of resource management is also in the same section of the IPv4 resource, the new resource. Now, if you can see, this states that 90%, we should check for 90% utilization of the all previous allocations or assignment that we have done. But there are cases where most end sites, for example, banks or other financial institutions, they would come with a request for a /24 because they are only considering their main site for operations. Now, when we issue that particular /24, they start their deployments and then they realize that maybe whoever is implementing realizes that they also have a redundant site, and this site is using a different service provider. Now, if they split that /24, both upstreams would not accept to call anything less than a /24. Now they hit a fix because they need an additional /24 to cover for the redundant site. Now, this is a question where we say, okay, the policy states that you will have to reach 90% of the /24 that you have. But necessarily they cannot do that because their infrastructure can only support maybe up to 60 or 50% of the /24. Now, this is a challenge that we come across, but because the policy states that they have to get to 90%, we don't have a choice. We refuse such a request to give them another /24 for redundancy. Now, operationally, it gives them dissatisfaction because they can't fully implement their solution the way they want. Now, it's also another thing we can put forward to the community to say, how would the community suggest AFRINIC or maybe the policy authors if they would want to consider such conditions into the policy so that for us, we find a better way in serving the community. So this is another question to both the policy authors as well as the community to say, we are here, we seek your guidance into finding a resolution to this issue. I'll move on now to the other experience that we also see is the intra-RIR transfer. We currently have the intra-RIR transfer, which was implemented. We are accepting transfers within the region of IPv4. The policy text is strict IPv4 only. But now somebody is transferring resources, they already have IPv6 and AS numbers that they are using. Policy doesn't cater for that. Right now what we do is only to accept the v4 and then we give them a new IPv6 and AS number, which means it's extra work for them to renumber. But this is now policy based. We can't do anything more than that until there is maybe a policy change or something. So it's another request to say if we, for us to ably assist the membership in terms of these transfers, something has to be considered. We as host masters cannot take it upon ourselves to make necessary changes, but we seek it from the community to say, help us and move on from this. There is a different way whereby we also consider mergers and acquisitions. These are different from the IPv4 based transfers. There are different conditions that apply. If it is a merger or an acquisition and we have all the information that backs up the process, we are able to transfer ASNs as well as IPv6. But if it is a pure market transfer, then it's a whole different scenario, and it's on IPv4 that goes through. So at least by the end of this day, we expect something maybe to come up, or by the end of this week, somebody would come in and think of making a change to that particular policy so that it can allow maybe for corporates to be able to transfer their IPv4, IPv6 as well as AS numbers. We also have another challenge, and this one has been it's been a prehistoric as well, because the AS number policy strictly says an entity should be mat-homing or should be planning to mat-home within a short period of time. So when most potential members or members comes asking for an AS number, and they only have one upstream provider, they can't justify that mat-homing requirement. And then what do we do? Because policy says that we cannot give them an ASN. We advise them to consult with their upstream, and the upstream announces it for them. But this is a challenge. Time has moved. We expect maybe this problem also, the community can do something to ensure that things can be able to proceed easily in that way. Because for us, we cannot do much, but we advise them to say it's a policy statement. Please view the policy, and then we will advise you that right now, until you find at least a second entity you can peer with. For the first time, if you only have a single BGP peer, we cannot be able to give you the AS number because the policy states so. So we hope somebody will take it up upon and propose a necessary change to the same. It would be helpful, but it's all in the hands of the community. We as hostmasters, we just provide a recommendation. We also have another challenge that we usually face in our day-to-day operations regarding registration. As you all know, we AFRINIC, one of the biggest things that we do is managing the registry. So in the registry part, it's about registering how the IP resources are being used. Now, we realize that over the time, some operators do register usage in the name of some reputable companies for various reasons. But now, at a certain day, this particular reputable company would come and say, hey, I'm receiving complaints from XYZ, they're saying I'm spamming them or I'm doing X and Y. But this is not my network. I'm not using those particular resources. Now there's a discrepancy. The company that owns that particular name says they are not using the particular resource, but our database contains information that says these particular resources are being used by this particular company. Now it's a problem whereby if we consult even the ones, either they are members, they may choose not to respond, but if they are not members, maybe they are legacy resource holders, they can say, I have the right to use my resources the way I want. So it becomes a challenge for us. We don't have a way forward on how we can handle this. Now we request whether maybe it could be necessary for the community to say whether we can interfere in that and be able maybe to clear those particular records which somebody has complained about being misused. But this is something also we would expect something from the community to give us a proper guide to say this is how best it can be carried. If it reaches consensus, the better. And the last thing we'll look at is the LEM delegation. I mentioned LEM delegation earlier on. I just wanted to put forward because, like I said, we have large volumes of records that are LEM in our database ever since we went live. We've been providing support, and we would like to encourage members to seriously look into this. Consult the LEM checker tool on our website. Make sure that your zones are responding properly before you even register them with us, so that we avoid this LEM delegation. Otherwise, once we start deleting, it may impact you the day you decide to put them into to work. So make sure that whenever you are registering your delegation with us, you already have your name servers properly configured. Okay, that's pretty much what I had for you, and I will take questions from you.
I just quickly wanted to supplement James on one of the slides regarding the policy proposal, the implemented policy IPv6 PI update. So yes, James mentioned that it's implemented. I just wanted to add that some tasks are pending automation. Yes, according to the author, the way he put the text in that proposal, I see he's itching to say something. That proposal requires that IPv6 PI space is routed and not disaggregated. So we are in the process of automating some of those tasks. The automation is not yet complete, but nevertheless, if a situation came where we needed to check compliance against those two, we could do manual checks. So just thought I should point that out.
Thank you, James, for your presentation. Ernest, actually, sorry, I am Jordi Palet. Actually, I was going to ask because in the website it says it's not implemented, so thanks for the clarification. I would like to suggest something regarding what you said in this presentation, and it's something being done at least in LACNIC, I am not sure if in other registries, is in the website have a specific section which recommendations to the community from the host masters and from the staff in general for possible policy proposals, so the community can look at that and say, hey, I am going to work in this policy proposal because I think I agree with the staff is needed. Okay, so in addition to please send this slide set to the list as soon as possible, because in the agenda I cannot find it. Make a section in the website which possible policy proposals, and keep that section with a form open for other community members to also post ideas for policy proposals, because I understand that some people is not happy doing a policy proposal, but they may be happy to actually submit an idea for one. And the last thing I want to comment is I am happy to send a policy proposal for each of the topics that you mentioned, but I will much prefer, and this is something that I have done also in LACNIC, to invite community members that have not been up to now involved in policy development to contact me, and I am happy to mentor them or help them in making policy proposals for solving all these problems. So just drop me an email or find me in the breaks, and I am happy to help you to do your own policy proposal or co-author with you, whatever you prefer. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Alain, sorry, I want to cut into the queue. My question to you was going to be, have you considered telling members who are affected by these issues, like the multi-homing requirements and all of that, have you considered telling them to engage in policy discussions? Do they know that policy is the reason why this is not possible and that they can contribute? I think they should be willing to contribute since they're the most affected.
Yes, to answer your question, yes, we do actually give them a proper explanation on the basis of our feedback. So we explain to them why we've come to our decision. We give them the applicable policies. We explain to them the necessary steps. We provide them links to the policy, to the PDP process. But for some extent, maybe like Jody had put it, some people just seem not interested to follow maybe the policy requesting procedures. But these are things that we do, but to some extent you realize that the member just opts to go for the easier or the straightforward, or not straightforward, but the where they feel like it's the best. We have scenarios like for the recent transfers we've done, up to at least 3 members, we've put it forward to them to say simple solution is request for transfer change, the policy update, or even consult the authors for the same to be done. But then they'll say, okay, just give me that, I'll renumber, there's a time period we provide just for the numbering to happen. So it's a thing that we do provide the feedback, but for some reason, seems like most people doesn't go through that.
Alain, please go ahead.
Okay, Alain Ayina Wakren again. So I have a couple of points, and some of them are just suggestions, and some of them are questions. So I will start with what you just, Ernest and Jody said about implementations. So I think maybe we should, in the future, before staff implement, should write an implementation plan, share with the community, for example, and also communicate to member on member list, for example, inform the members that there is this policy, it's going to be implemented, it may affect, etc., etc. I think this kind of communication ahead may help the membership. Okay, because as we said, not all members really participate in the PDP, but when we implement, it impacts the member. So this is a suggestion in terms of maybe communication and organize how we do. So for the lame delegations, I think we had some discussion back, and in one of your slides you mentioned it. So one question was, are you checking the lame delegation based on the numbers which are used, because they are recording in the who is dead, and the numbers are not used in the routing table, but they have some old DNS record. Maybe you may want to look at them. See, the question is, do you check that these numbers is in the routing table somehow, or had root object, something like that, before you check the reverse? Otherwise, there are old data there, okay, for numbers not being used anymore. So are you putting effort in cleaning the reverse for these numbers? This is a question. Yeah. The other question is about the issue for the CPM. This reminds me, we had a discussion of going to the CPM format. That is good, but it also have some limitations. But if we want to follow, because this CPM, we borrow it from ARIN, then what ARIN does is that you remove, they put in the CPM, then say this section has been removed, okay, and then you put the other one to avoid this kind of confusion where you have this section, and the member gets confused. Okay. On the issue of, or you said the data center, the people having issue with the implementation of the policy, I think there is one thing we all need to remember. We write policy just to set the framework, but we trust staff, and we should accept that BCP, best current practice, are also part of the policies we design. So even if it is not written there, okay, but you have this issue of data center needing these numbers, and it match the current best practice, you should give them. You should not say policy say this. No, BCP, for me, BCP part of a policy, even if it's not written there. Because if we try to fix everything by policy, I'm afraid. Then I didn't quite well get your point on, because the current intra-area policy does not allow transfer of ASN and IPv6, because my understanding, we are transferring the unused space. Okay, but from what I got, it was affecting some operations. So maybe if you can elaborate a little bit on these things for me. I also think every time we come, we hear Hostmaster, your policy implementation report, but we also think what is missing is AFRINIC, okay, running a review of how people are using the numbers, okay, to give us feedback. Then we know how we also adjust the policy. Because you adopt policy, you implement the policy, you give the number to people. It's good that we also review we also review how people are using it so that we can adjust the policy. So I'm already saying that the review is very important. So because we will go for a different policy, it will create a different problem, and we keep going. Let also have experience from how people are using the numbers in real life as feedback. Then we can adjust the things. You also said something, maybe I've been too long, so thank you.
Should I take?
Okay, let's take all questions. I think we have 3 people lined up in the mic, so let's take all the questions, then you can reply.
Okay, thank you. This is Ahmad Ad-Din from Sudatel, Sudatel Company. Here you are not mentioned in the presentation about the root object, but I need to understand before we are using RIPE for creating root object. Now we have root object at AFRINIC. So we need to create a root object in RIPE anymore, or just AFRINIC is enough? And after we create the root object, is it automatically update the root in the internet routing table, or we need to do it manually? Thank you.
My name is Daniel from Nigeria. I seem to find 2 conflicting presentations from yesterday's member services presentation and today's. Even though you drew that out as a challenge in terms of how much utilization or percentage utilization one can have before a new allocation. Yesterday, during the member services report, I observed it was said 80%. And I suspect that is what you are using, not 90%. Because that's what the member services report said yesterday, that you allocate only when you have confirmed an 80% utilization. So I don't see why you're having problem if you are using that. But what I also want to find out is that maybe we're doing something wrong with the policies. I will suspect that if we have similarities in policies, or a policy is coming to take care of a previous policy, rather than keeping those policies, we should be bringing up those policies for amendments, rather than trying to do a new policy. It's not a new policy, but there's an issue just as you have drawn. So what I'm saying is that now these problems that you have drawn, instead of calling them new policies, let's take the old policies and address the issues in those policies and call them amendment policies, so that we can discard the previous policies, not keeping them again. Because if you keep keeping them, that's when there's a previous policy, no abrogation of that policy, or no cancellation or deletion or whatever we will call the previous policy, so that we have an amendment. So what I'm saying is that I would rather want to suggest that in AFRINIC we should have what I want to call approved policy amendment policy. So that means it's a policy that has already been approved, but now we want to have a policy that now takes care of how do we amend approved policies. And I will want to say that if a policy is approved, it's no more the author's right, if I will call it, that it must be the author, the original author of that policy that will call for amendment. I suspect that is not what it means. Okay, fine. So it means anybody can call for the amendment, not the original author, because by the time you approve a policy, when it had gone through the community, it doesn't become the author's policy anymore. It becomes the community's policy. So everybody has right, because I had the presenter talking about the authors looking at the policy, the authors looking at the policy. So I will also want to ask, for example, the issue you have with transferring intra RI transfer, where you have problems of IPv6 and ASN. What if, because it means 2 things now, because possibly I'm not transferring my entire resource, I'm transferring a partial. So if I'm transferring a partial of my resource, then definitely you can't transfer my ASN and possibly my IVV6. But if I'm transferring whole, and I think maybe that is what should come and solve this problem, that if I'm transferring the whole resource, then I think the policy should allow, just as Alain said, there's some discretion that the host masters should have in terms of if I'm transferring whole, I should as well transfer everything, because if I'm transferring my whole resource, what am I keeping the ASN for and the IPv6? So that discretion could be exercised, but of course, by informing the community at the end of the day that this is what we have done, and I think we can give it that level of discretion. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Jordi Palet. One of the reasons the people that has problems with policy proposals is not willing to participate in the PDP, and I have seen that in several regions, and I am not saying is everybody has the same problem, but one of the problems is some people is not allowed by corporate policy to openly speak about their problems and how to approach them. Okay, so that's something that needs to be considered. That's why we need the support from the rest of the community. The second thing I want to say very quickly is I agree with what Alan has said about the policy implementation report, and my suggestion will be in the staff assessment to include a section for draft policy implementation report. You got what I mean, Ernest? In the staff analysis of a policy proposal, you include a draft plan of the implementation. So the community can get already an idea about how much time it will take, what are the steps, the process, etc. Just a draft.
Where?
In the staff assessment of the
Yes,
policy proposals.
if you look at the staff assessments, we have a section 4 that talks briefly
about that.
Implementation detail.
Yeah, but I am saying you may need to extend a little bit, even if it's still a draft, but maybe a little bit more, okay? Just a suggestion. The last thing I want to say very quickly, I don't agree with what Alan said about the staff must be able to interpret somehow policies. I think it's good in some specific policies to have a text such as if you need to say examples, explain that those are just examples and the staff must at their discretion take other cases, similar cases, okay? Because sometimes it's difficult to describe all the possible situations, but giving examples, the staff can interpret how to apply that policy in other cases. I think that's good, but not in general give the staff the attribution to interpret the policies in case something is not clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to go to Madhvi first, then you can answer the question. The mic is closed, but I will return back to you.
Okay, I just wanted, thank you. Madhvi Gokur, Registration Services Manager. I just wanted to reply to Alain's comment about staffs using their discretion. If the policy is so clear as to 90% usage, all we can do is apply that. The discretion that we use, because we have operated networks, we understand what a network is. We actually work with our members to see how they are using it. So when we're saying that they can't comply with a 90% usage, so that means by looking at how they're deploying the existing V4, they are not compliant with the 90% usage. So if the maths say they're not compliant, I'm sorry, we will be rejecting. So if where staff discretion is required, then perhaps the policy should mention that staff's discretion is recommended in such cases. So this is where, as staff, we know that we can take some action. The policy clause allows us to take some of the actions. Okay.
Yes, Alan, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, this is Alan Barrett. I'd like to give another example related to what Madhvi just said. In the In the previous V4 policy, before the soft landing came in, it was 80%, not 90%. And also there was some text in the previous policy which said, I can't remember the exact wording, but something along the lines of, or if they cannot continue to expand their network with what they have. And that text has been removed. So we interpret that as we no longer have that discretion. So when a member says, we haven't used 90%, but we can't expand our network unless we get more, the staff do not have that discretion, but because the policy has not given it to them. Although the previous policy did give staff that discretion.
Sorry, Madhvi, AFRINIC. Just to respond to the question, the comment about there was 80% was mentioned in yesterday's presentation. 80% existed before the soft landing phase, and we usually mention that as from the soft landing, when we reached the soft landing policy, when we triggered it in April 2017, the 80% rule fell away and the 90% rule came, we implemented the 90% utilization that the soft landing policy requires us to do. But I think there's something that I admit we have not informed, or we've not informed our membership about, is for the end user assignments where it was easy to get an additional assignment before soft landing. In the current soft landing policy, that ease of requesting for additional assignment fell away and the 90% rule came in place. So our end users are not aware of that at the moment, I think. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'll proceed to now respond to the rest of the questions. Alain, I think part of your questions have been answered, but I'll proceed with the remaining. There was the issue about the CPM, the way it can be managed. We have other policies which strictly says that this particular section will make another section obsolete. So that is a simple, straightforward swap. But in cases where we don't have anything that states so, that's when we implement the way it has been. So we would encourage maybe policy authors to say, this one will be taking or will be making this particular section obsolete, so that would be easier for us in terms of implementation. So we encourage the policy authors to make it clear, so that at least when we are implementing, we know which one to remove, which section to completely remove, and which one to remain in there. LEM delegation, you spoke about the LEM delegation, what we are doing in terms of the checks. We are doing the checks based on the legislation that we have. We are not checking if the announcement is being made, but we are checking if we can, if the name servers are there and responding authoritatively. So if they are not, then notifications are provided, and if nothing is done, they will be deleted. But we are trying to work very much with the members so that if they are actively, or they plan to actively use them, make sure that they respond authoritatively. Yeah, I'll also catch up on the data center as well. The data center part where I mentioned about limitations that we face. Now, you spoke about the best practices that we can adopt, but it's not easy for staff to just implement because we may come across so many or different best practices. But we also asked maybe the authors during the policy proposals to provide specific or certain best practices, links or documents in it, so that we can easily refer to that. Because at some point we may bring in a best practice document that the author would not agree with. In our staff assessment before the policy goes, once we receive the policy, we do outline how we understand it and how we intend to implement it when it comes to resource management. So when the author agrees to our assessment, we take it that way. But if they don't, they give us their interpretation, and then it is taken as such. So at least we encourage authors to provide such best practices as documents or links so that we can proceed better. I'll take the question for our colleague from Sudatel. Route objects. You mentioned about route objects. The route objects are not covered in this particular presentation because they are not basically policy based. It's a technical implementation that had to be done, so it is not covered in here. But to answer your question easily, you would not be able to create route objects in RIPE anymore. You won't be able to make changes to them. As we speak, we advise you to create yours in AFRINIC routing registry. AFRINIC routing registry is mirrored by RIPE itself and other RIRs, EntityCom, ARIN, other routing registries, including those from other RIRs. So if you create them in ours, you are safe and sound. All right. Daniel, I'll answer your question. I think the first question has been answered regarding the 80% usage. But I'll move on to the policy management, where you indicated that we should take the policies should be, the policy update should maybe consider taking the old one and updating them instead of creating a whole new thing. I think this is much more of a discussion that can be put forward to the community to say that's how it should be done, because for us, we look at the implementation side, but the way this can be best handled would be on the community side, where an agreement or a best common approach can be discussed on regarding the policy proposals. You want to, Ernest, to add some more on that?
Yeah, just to supplement more on James's answer. Yes, the PDP is very clear on proposing new policies or improving or making improvements to current policies. So, Daniel, the process is the same, whether you are actually bringing up a new policy proposal altogether or making improvements to what is currently there. It does not have to be the author of the previous policy to make the improvement. Anybody can do that, and it is exactly the same process. So I hope that is clear and clears the confusion.
Your last question was on transfers. Whether, yes, there are different scenarios. Every transfer comes in on a case-by-case basis. Some would come, like you indicated, it could be a partial, but they may wish to transfer out this ASN as well. It could be a full transfer, and yes, it's obvious they would wish to do that, but the challenge that we had is the policy text was strict on that, so we couldn't interpret it in our own way to say just because the entire infrastructure could be transferred or the transfer is happening for all the resources, then we completely conclude that the ASN also should go. But the policy said IPv4 into RIR transfer, so it never mentioned of IPv6 or AS numbers. No. All right, I think Jody's question mostly are answered by Ernest. Okay, so.
Last question comment, I hope it's quick. I hope it's one. Go ahead.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Actually, because you answered a lot of my concerns, namely by Mr. James. Yet, I would like to draw your attention on the principles of replacing one part of policy that will render the preceding one obsolete. My remark is that we cannot solve everything via policies unless we create the Academy of Policies in order to change everything. I think that the staff has the duty to make proposals to facilitate the task of policy making. Therefore, I think it would be better to include more clarification. I think the more we go into specificities and into details, the more things become complex. Therefore, I think it's better to make more clarification and to focus on the main guidelines. I appreciate the fact that the concerns have been taken into account by PPDC policies. Thank you.
To update the policy itself, so.
All right, so in that case, I would like to thank you all for your attention and have a good policy day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James, very much for this comprehensive presentation.